what's happening, everybody? Welcome back to Foil Hats Optional. Thanks for joining me today. Today is a special day. Today is my 50th birthday. So I thought I'd grab my special occasion bourbon, come on in the old podcasting room and do a podcast all by myself. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so you can keep up with future episodes. I put out an episode a couple weeks ago that was sort of a pilot. My daughter was nice enough to be my impromptu guest, and like I expected, she was great. I had a really good time recording that episode, and she never stops impressing me as a young woman. She will likely accomplish many great things with her drive and determination. And that's good, because the world needs more people like her. I'm learning how to do this on the fly, and hopefully every episode will get a little bit better as I learn how to be a podcast host. I thought I'd take this opportunity to try to outline what I envision this podcast to be about and give everyone a little background on myself to help give perspective on how I view and deal with life on its multitude of levels. I was born on March 19th, 1974. I was going to do this podcast in my birthday suit and pull a Red Hot Chili Peppers thing, and just put a sock over my junk. But the problem that I ran into is that I couldn't find a sock small enough. So I just decided to put on a regular suit. So hopefully this looks good too. I've always said that age is just a number. You might feel a little bit worse because you're getting older and your joints don't react the same they did when you were 20, but like some aspects of life, I'll never grow up, because if you take things too serious, where's the fun in that? And why just live your life and enjoy it as much as you can, because you only get one crack at it, right? I grew up in a typical middle-class family. Both of my parents worked. They were trying to provide the best life they could for me and my younger brother. We lived in a great middle-class neighborhood. It was like the greatest time to grow up as a kid, back in the 80s. And there was a lot of kids our age in our neighborhood, as well as the surrounding ones. And it was a diverse group of kids. We played outside in that neighborhood like all summer long, just like most of the kids did back then. We stayed out there until our parents called us in for the night. Somehow I managed to graduate from high school, despite checking out for the entire last year of it. I had my first kid at 19 with my high school sweetheart, believe it or not, who I'm still married to today. I took a job at the place that we called the Duck Farm because, I needed to get my shit together, and fast. I was going to be a father, and I needed to make sure I could provide. So I worked there for a couple years before taking a job at a company that I would spend nearly 20 years of my life working at. During that time, my wife and I had 2 more kids, bought a few different houses, and worked on trying our best to improve our lives for our 3 children and us. Our kids were involved in sports, music, and various other extracurricular activities. I helped coach when they were in sports. Now our kids are all grown and out of the house, and we're actually grandparents now, believe it or not. I played bar league softball for many years. I shot in pool league. I bowl. I still bowl now. I got a bowl tomorrow, actually. Hanging out with my buddies, and that's kind of what it's all about. You get out and hang out with your buddies. I left my career in the garage door business after 19 years for an opportunity I never thought I would get. I was taking a desk job as the field service manager for a company that manufactured airplane hangar doors. That role evolved into field service / project / safety manager. I was project managing installs of hangar doors all over the country, and a couple out of the country, actually. This was something I had zero experience doing, but I never turned down a good challenge, so I thought, let's just add this to the list of things that I know now. I traveled quite a bit during that job. I met some really cool people working there. I stayed with that company for about 4.5 years before I realized I needed to do something that fit my personality better. So I left, got back into the garage door business, only this time I was running the show for myself. That's what I still do now. And this podcast and a whole shitload of other things, but, whatever. I guess I'm never satisfied with where I'm at in my life to some extent, so I always think I can improve it in some aspect or another, and for me, I'm trying to improve it for me and people around me. All right, enough about me. So let's get to the meat of this thing, or let's work on getting there. I plan to have a variety of guests on, and many of the guests will likely be close friends and family. I believe we all have something interesting to bring to the dance, just, not so-called celebrities. I mean, they put their underwear on just like the rest of us do, sometimes inside out, right? I'll be putting episodes out like this every once in a while, just because maybe it's something that I find to be a little bit more important, or maybe it just will be boring to whoever would be my guest. So why don't I just bore you all instead? Hopefully I'm not boring you, and hopefully you'll learn something by the end of this episode. So what am I going to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about a lot of things. Some things will be more serious than others, but for the most part, I want this to be entertaining, educational, and honest. Today, before I get into that, I just got to have a drink of bourbon. I brought this thing in here, so let me just move away. Good stuff. Okay, so today I want to talk about something that hits me firsthand. School. Specifically, our public school system in America. Now, don't go thinking I'm going to get all crazy bashing our school system. That's not it. So just hang with me for a little bit. I guess maybe I will be bashing it by the time I'm done, but it's not my intention to just go crazy on our school system. So I was listening to a podcast about a year ago, and the guest was the co-founder of a school in Wichita, Kansas called The Wonder School. They take a different approach to teaching and learning. After listening to that podcast, I was left thinking, man, I wonder what I would be like today if I had applied myself in school, and if the environment that they created in school, or I should say the environment that they've created in the Wonder School, would have been better suited to me or other people like me. I'm not going to get into all the details about that school or their approach, because this episode isn't really just about that school. If you want more details about the Wonder School, you can go to daringtowonder.com or check out Jordan Peterson's podcast. That's where I caught wind of this. So I'm sure that I'm not alone when I say that school was something I was not totally invested in. It was always one of those necessary evil types of things. You just had to do it because your parents told you it was good for you. Depending on my age, I was more interested in playing wiffle ball, skateboarding, or picking up chicks. A guy's got to have his priorities in line, right? But don't get me wrong, learning is most definitely good for you. As a matter of fact, I spend more time learning now than I ever did in school. I love to learn new things. I also love to read now. I read every day. As a matter of fact, I just finished the longest novel I've read to date, 1,070 pages. There's a great book by Ayn Rand called Atlas Shrugged. I highly suggest it if you have the time and the stomach for it. It's not gruesome or anything like that. It just hits some things that you can connect to real life stuff. Some people don't want to deal with that kind of stuff, so they shy away from books like that, but I tend to like them. I've grown more intellectually from reading in the last year and a half than I ever would have imagined 10 years ago. Back in school, you wouldn't catch me dead reading a book. I think I read like 3/4 of The Outsiders in high school, and to be honest, it was the only book I found remotely interesting, which is probably why. Just because something is required reading doesn't make it necessarily interesting. If you don't find it interesting, there's a good chance you just are going to be going through the motions and not reading it at all. Asking a student to do a dreaded book report on something they've just glossed over or didn't read, period, almost encourages cheating, or at the very least dishonesty, because the book report was how you were graded on required reading. If you didn't read the book, how could you write a book report on it? You can't, unless you cheat. I think the cookie cutter approach to required reading is inherently flawed. It doesn't allow the reader to extract the full value of the literature they are reading. Instead of forcing students to read a specific book, why not have a collection of books on different topics and let the students pick the one that they feel fits their interests best. That approach could lead to students wanting to read more rather than less. And I'll tell you from personal experience, I wish I would have been reading religiously my whole life. This is just one example of what I didn't like about school. So this got me thinking, maybe it's just not that I didn't like school, but maybe it's the approach of educating that didn't work for me. Imagine if we could somehow find a way to make the learning process enticing to young people rather than a chore that they're punished for if they don't do it right, where they got to meet predetermined group standards, basically. In the U.S., our public schools have adopted a version of the Prussian education system. And you're going to go, what's that? Some of you might know, but some of you might not. Well, I'll explain it. But what I'll have to do in order to explain it is give you just a short history lesson / geography lesson. By the way, I'm able to do this from, you guessed it, reading. Prussia was a kingdom in Central Europe. It was founded in 1525. It was officially abolished shortly after World War II in 1947. It mostly consisted of the area we now call Germany, with the exception of parts of Poland, Russia, the Czech Republic, and Denmark. Those parts were also part of the Prussian Empire. Central Europe back then and the Italian peninsula were mainly a collection of smaller states in the mid-1800s. In the 1860s, Otto von Bismarck and the King of Prussia, Wilhelm I, they started a series of strategic wars to bring many German-speaking lands under Prussian control and to force other European powers to recognize the existence of a German state. By 1871, after they defeated Napoleon III in the Franco-Prussian War, the task was complete. Just like they would say in Star Wars, complete. The war united all the German states against a common enemy, and the German Empire was formed. Wilhelm I became the first emperor of Germany. So for the first time ever, there was a country called Germany on the map, and it was part of the Prussian Empire. Before this happened, Prussia was basically getting their butts kicked militarily for the better parts of the 1800s. It's not a good place to be when most of Europe was at war trying to establish territory during this time. When they were defeated in the early stages of the Napoleonic Wars, one thing they thought contributed to the defeat was that soldiers were thinking for themselves rather than following orders. Here's where the Prussian education system comes into play. The Prussian education system was introduced as a basic concept in the late 18th century. This new model of education provided skills like reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also taught duty, respect, and the ability to follow orders. Elites, mind you, still had their own schooling. This new model was primarily for the working class, or proletariat as they were referred to back then. Johann Fichte heavily influenced this model. He believed, and this is where I start to get like, I got to shake my head a little bit. So Fichte believed that destroying free will was the key to societal control. Here's a couple of quotes from Fichte that might help you get a sense of his philosophical view. And I quote, "The schools must fashion the person and fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than what you wish him to will. Education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils are thus schooled, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished." So these are just a couple quotes from this guy. And there's a whole bunch more out there that are just as ominous. You know, I just have to wonder what tyrants this guy worshiped back in the day with his philosophy, because to me, that's kind of disturbing. Uniformity was a basic premises of the Prussian education model. It focused on performing repetitive tasks and like-minded thinking. It was aimed at stripping children of their ability to think independently. In the classrooms, children all had their desks lined up in orderly rows, much like you would in a military setting. A bell starts and stops class just as it does in a factory for starting and stopping work. The teacher stands at the front of the class, directing the students much like a general or a boss. It's worth noting that during the time leading up to the implementation of the new system, there was a lot of civil unrest. There were many violent rebellions constantly popping up. And what better way to curb those than by creating a bunch of obedient factory workers, or better yet, soldiers, because they needed both. Karl Marx was another guy who was a believer in the factory style of schooling. And I'm sure most of you are all familiar with good old Karl Marx. He wrote the Communist Manifesto. You know, Karl Marx, the godfather of communism. The political system that Joseph Stalin presided over that imprisoned over 18 million of his own people in the gulags. What were the gulags? The gulags were corrective labor camps. They were filled with political prisoners and so-called criminals. If you lived in the Soviet Union during Stalin's rule, everybody was basically considered a criminal. But I'll refrain from getting into all the Stalin stuff because that's really for an entirely another episode of the podcast. So another guy, how could we forget Mao Zedong, communist dictator of China? He was responsible for what I just read, like up to 70 million deaths during his reign. I mean, 70 million. I am not joking. So yeah, communism's done great things. It's done great things for people at the top of the food chain, but it's done nothing for the rest of the peasants. If you can't tell, I'm not much of a fan of the Prussian education system or anything it represents. Okay, back to school and the connection. Enter American legislator Horace Mann. Who was Horace Mann? He was born May 4th, 1796, and died August 2nd, 1859. He was a lawyer. He was elected to the Massachusetts State Senate, I think in 1827, and served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1848 to 1853. During his time in the Massachusetts legislature, he was active in the interest of education, public charities. This one's funny, I'm sorry. Laws for the suppression of alcoholic drinks and lotteries. I don't know why those are lumped together in the same thing, but anyways, back then it was a different time, right? So people cared about different things. He was known as the first great American advocate of public education. He believed that in a democratic society, education should be free and universal. It should be non-sectarian, democratic in method, and reliant on well-trained professional teachers. Sounds reasonable, right? I don't really see a problem with that. So you're probably asking the same thing. What's the problem with that? But he embarked on a journey to Europe in 1843 to evaluate national school systems. When he saw the Prussian model, he fell in love with it. I'm sure the Prussians were more than happy to let him in on their ulterior motives. Their new system was designed to produce mindless, obedient soldiers. When Mann came back to the States, he lobbied heavily for using something similar. And here we are today. We're still using it. So this has brought many questions to my mind. Is a factory or military style of education the best way of educating? A style of education that focuses on repetitive tasks and group thinking rather than focusing on the individual and creative thinking just doesn't sit well with me. I'm going to use boys for this example because on average, girls fare much better in the learning environment and tend to have longer attention spans than boys, especially at young ages. I, at one point in my life, was a young boy, so I can relate, and that's why I'm going to use boys for this example. The attention span of a child, in general, is 2 to 3 times their age. So for a 9 to 10-year-old, it's between 20 and 30 minutes. Younger, less. Older, more. The young brain is developing very rapidly and is looking for lots of stimulation. Young boys in particular are a huge ball of energy and curiosity. That means they have a very hard time sitting still for long periods. So sitting them at a desk for extended periods, focusing on repetitive tasks, is a big ask of any teacher. A system designed to keep children stimulated while maximizing the potential of each individual's ability seems to be more logical to me. I can hear it now. How do you expect teachers to do that? I don't know, and I'm not claiming that I have all the answers. I'm just posing some questions I think we all should be asking, including and most importantly, teachers. I know it's hard for teachers to speak against the grain because this is their livelihood, and if they do, they will be cast out as outsiders if they don't conform to the standards posed on them that may not have the child's best interest in mind. Allow me to use an example of something that happened when one of my children was in high school. I'll use this to elaborate on the previous statement. One of my kids was in their first or maybe second year of high school when a new superintendent was hired. The new superintendent, of course, had to put their stamp on the district and had the brilliant idea of putting kids into academies in high school so they could focus on what they thought they wanted to do for a living after high school or college. Here's my problem with that. How old were you when you knew that when you finally figured out what you wanted to do for a living? Are you doing it now? Are you doing something you never saw yourself doing because you needed a job and it ended up turning into a career? About 80% of college students change their major at least once, and some up to 3 times. So you're telling me that a 15-year-old has a better idea than an 18 to 20-year-old of what they want to spend their life doing? Why would you pigeonhole these kids at 15 when they're probably going to change their minds, not once, twice, but maybe 3 times in college? Does that sound like a plan that has the kid's best interest in mind, or a plan that has the system's best interest in mind? What I do know is that doing the same thing for over 100 years with declining results is definitely not the answer. Since 2020, standardized test scores have declined. Some charts will actually show that the scores over a longer period are on an upward trend, but that can be misleading because the bar has been lowered on standardized testing, which in turn raises scores. So on paper, it might look okay, but is it really? Since 2018, homeschooling has increased by 51%, and homeschooled kids typically score 15 to 30% higher than public school kids on standardized tests. I'm not saying that homeschooling your kids is the be-all, end-all answer, and I know there can be drawbacks to homeschooling. One drawback that I would point out right away is socializing, because it's necessary. Socializing with other children is totally a necessary thing to do, and that's where something public schools excel at compared to homeschooling. It also can be a problem because, maybe both parents work full-time. Some people are just shitty parents and have no business homeschooling their kids. That's an entirely different problem in a different topic. Teachers tend to teach to the test. I'm not blaming them. That's the way the system is designed. If a student finishes a task faster than the rest of the class, they are told to sit quietly while the rest of the class finishes. I've seen it happen. Not all students learn at the same level. I believe they should be given as much information as they can handle to maximize their potential. Our public schools consume more and more resources and funds while providing less and less in the way of education. Creative arts and tech ed classes are the first to go. The creative mind needs to be encouraged. Creativity facilitates progress and innovation. Progress and innovation are good for society. Schools tend to put more emphasis on the social aspect of learning rather than the reason for being educated in the first place. Smart people are hindered because they are not encouraged to excel. The system finds it more important that little Johnny doesn't get left behind with his feelings hurt because he's at the bottom, while they have no problem keeping little Jenny from achieving her full potential by keeping her closer to little Johnny's level, rather than the level she belongs. They do this, and they tell you that it's for the good of everybody, the betterment of all. Aren't we better off with as many smart people as we can develop? Do our school systems offer a good environment for these people? In my experience as a student, a father, they don't appear to. As a caveman would say, smart person good, obedient slave bad. And I'm going to tell you right now, if the fucking Geico guy shows up with his buddies trying to cancel me, I'm just saying, I ain't going down without a fight. Here's a couple questions I'll leave you with just to finish up on this. Who benefits the most from an obedient, placid, and naive population? Who is easier to control? The person that questions nothing or the person that questions everything? Done with the serious stuff. let's get to everybody's favorite part. It's time for the bitch of the day. So today, my bitch of the day is, drum roll, please. It's my birthday. I'm trying to get canceled by everybody today, so I'm just gonna say it. Stop selling your religion door to door. And by that, I mean stop selling it all together. If you're selling it, I sure as hell ain't buying it. I mean, if it's as great as you say it is, then why would you need to sell it at all? Nobody wants you standing on their porch trying to hand out Jesus trading cards or free passes to your mega church, where you brainwash young children into believing dinosaurs walk the earth at the same time as humans. You ever wonder why people are letting their dogs out at the same time you're walking up the driveway to enlighten them? It's not a coincidence. Stop standing on street corners with signs that say, Jesus saves. Yeah, maybe he does. But you know who else saves? Mariano Rivera. He's the best saver ever in baseball. And you know who else saves? My wife. She saves at Aldi. You don't see me on a street corner holding a sign that says, Jenny got 2-for-1 avocados today. You know why? Because the people driving by don't give a shit if we eat half-price guacamole in my house. There's 5 major religions on this planet. No offense to Heaven's Gate people. I hope your spaceship was cool like the Star Wars ones, and I hope it had, warp drive or light speed or ludicrous speed or whatever. But 5 religions? Why is yours the right one? Don't get me wrong. I don't think religion is bad at all. You could say that some of them have pretty sketchy values, but I think they're good at giving a good set of basic rules for conducting yourself in a civilized society. Here's the deal. People have faith in different things. They should. They need to. People that have lost faith in everything do bad things. Again, faith good, no faith bad. Oh, shit. Here comes the fucking caveman again. You have faith in whatever you want to, and I'll have faith in whatever I want to. I'm not going to try to sell you mine, so don't try to sell me yours. If religion works for you, cool. But you don't need to sell it. It should sell itself. Okay, last but not least, here's some random, unimportant knowledge that you might want. And if you don't want it, turn it off. Do you know what they call a flock of crows? They call it a murder. Do you know why? Mainly based on folklore, because crows are scavengers by nature, and they were often found on battlefields and hanging around the gallows picking the flesh of corpses. They used to say that crows would peck out the eyes of the dead to attain their excellent vision. Hence, a murder of crows. Maybe next time we can talk about why they call a flock of owls a parliament of owls. So once again, thanks for tuning in and thanks for hanging around if you're still here. Hopefully I left you guys with something that you didn't have before you got here. It's my birthday. And I think I'm going to go have some more bourbon. Well, bye.